If you enjoy listening to The Edge, support them by subscribing to The Edge on iTunes, Stitcher, and you can listen through the iHeartRadio app. Get busy listening.
We're listening to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
Welcome. A lot of you have begun to send me correspondence of one sort or another, meaning correspondence sounds like you're sending me something from your vacation. And what I mean is you're sending a reaction or thoughts and that sort of thing. And I try to respond thoroughly to everybody who sends anything in that spirit of receiving emails. Our email address is edgewithmarkthompson@gmail.com. I got reaction to John Colbelt. John Colbelt is someone who is on the political right, you might say, and I'm someone who's on the political left. So I'm on the Young Turks, do a lot of stuff with TYT, and I feel very comfortable there because there are a lot of people who share my progressive values and my progressive politics, but I also try to give some airtime and some conversation and back and forth to those who don't share my politics. I just feel as though that makes for interesting conversations, and that's what this show has always been. It's been about interesting conversations. Well, John Colbelt, as you can imagine, because he's right of center, the homeless issue really bummed out a lot of people, and I went back and forth on the plastics and tried to represent without being an a-hole to him, because I also feel as though I want people who come on the show not to feel attacked, and so I push back a bit, but maybe I don't push back enough. So in the case of John Colbelt, some people felt that I didn't push back enough of him on the homeless issue, and then others said, thank you so much for allowing him to say his piece when he was representing positions that you clearly don't agree with. And so I end up with, I hope, what was a general disposition that is helpful to the show, which is I let people say their piece, I try to make the point that I need to make, and then we move on. And that is just about the best I can do. I'm not going to sit here and go on a jihad for many of the things that I care a lot about, but I appreciate your input, and if you have reactions, you want to say anything, I would be happy to share your reactions and be happy to take it and incorporate your thoughts and suggestions. You can reach me at edgewithmarkthompson@gmail.com. Now, with Michael Shure to start the show, a regular listener talking about the crisis in America when it comes to education. He represents a position that deserves to be heard. And again, it's not the traditional progressive position. He's frustrated with progressive politics. Then it's John Iadarola. John is a TYT host, and he's also part of an Arctic expedition that just got back. And now that Arctic expedition is chronicled in a new series called True North. It's a documentary series that launched on Go90, and he'll tell you about Go90. It's an app through Verizon, but you don't need Verizon to watch it, and it's really good, this show. I think you'll enjoy hearing from John. I'm excited that he's on the show, so that will be right after we finish with Michael Shure. You can support our show by writing positive reviews on iTunes. Giving us 5-star reviews really does matter because it moves us up in the queue, and believe it or not, in the iTunes universe, podcast universe, that really matters. We're on YouTube. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. We've only been on YouTube, I think, a fairly short time, but it's great to be on YouTube, and you can subscribe there and receive notifications when we're on. Also on Stitcher. We're on iHeartRadio, and appreciate all the different places that you subscribe and download our show. You can support our show financially because we take no commercial sponsorships. You can do it through the Amazon link. If you're going to shop Amazon anyway, click on the Amazon link on our website, edge-show.com. That will take you to the same Amazon you normally end up in, but you can, in this case, buy whatever you want, and we'll get a little piece of whatever you buy. We don't see what you buy. We don't know how much you spent, but it just comes to us in a small bundle because they've kept track of the fact that you clicked on the Amazon link through our website. As a result, we get a little piece. And finally, those of you who have sent us a PayPal contribution, wow, so cool of you. On our website, edge-show.com, there is a PayPal link, and a few of you have clicked on that and sent us money, and man, that is so cool, and it all stays with this podcast. It pays for the webmaster, and it pays for the hosting services, and every dollar stays with this show. No one makes any money. All right. Thanks for being here. Let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage, it means.
Hey, look, I just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
Time for the Fast 15, politics, and more. It's Michael Shure, everybody. Yes!
Thank you.
Everyone.
Wow. Thank you.
Yes.
Overwhelming.
Michael, we're doing something a little different today. We have a regular listener who writes into us people can do that.
They can just get on the show by writing in? Come on. How's this
Well,
happening?
that's not the reason we're having
Oh,
him on.
okay.
But we do welcome reaction. And let's put him on the special telephonic connect.
I'm a little leery of Randy. I mean, he's been tough on me.
Randy is critical of the occasional, what he feels is an echo chamber of progressive politics that occasionally can emerge on this show.
I don't know what he's talking about. About.
He lives in Palm Desert, which is a lovely community in California.
A constituent of Dr. Raul Ruiz, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is the voice of...
He's up for election again.
That's the voice of Randy, who is on the line now. And Randy sent a note about proficiency in math and reading nationwide and here in California. And it prompted sort of a little back and forth. He said, I'd really like to talk with Michael Shure about this and a few other things. At least we can touch on this, and if there's time, we can touch on something else maybe. But Randy, anyway, this is a long way of saying welcome to our program.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Michael, for talking with me.
No, it's great to have you here. There was a long-time local news anchor here who Mark probably knew, Jerry Dunphy, who would, oh, yeah, of course, always open up with From the Desert to the Sea, and on the edge today, we really are from the desert to the sea.
We can see the sea.
And we can hear the desert.
Indeed. Randy, you are an interesting guy because your politics are sort of mixed, wouldn't you say?
I would say they are. They lean on the conservative side, but socially, I think I'm somewhat liberal.
Are you the elusive independent that we hear so much about every 4 years?
Well, with the choices presented to me in California, what have you, independent doesn't really give us a choice. We're really basically a one-party state with a Republican offering, but it's usually a sacrificial lamb.
Right.
Right. Do you see any benefits of Democratic control? I mean, that is to say, you don't think everything in California is bad, do you?
Mark, if you want to get into what I consider the progressive, quote-unquote, miracle of California, we can go right into it. It's a disaster on almost every level. Do you want to go that way, or do you want to go into education?
Let's talk about education.
Let's talk about education, but I want to get onto that another time because I sort of see California, particularly given the disposition of the feds right now, as the only outpost for environmental protection. Or I shouldn't say the only, but one of the few.
You're right, Mark. I know your strong feelings, and you are right. California is not all bad, and California's progressive policies certainly aren't all bad. Unfortunately, like everything else in life, you have priorities. And what do you want in your quality of life? You want to have a great environment for yourself and for your progeny and the future, because without a great environment, you've got no future. That's true. And by the same token, what's going on with the homelessness, the disease, the education, the overcrowding, the traffic, the cost of living, the taxation. These are all real issues, too, that apply to the people living here and now in the state.
Right. All right, so we'll get to a lot of that other stuff. The state is made up, and life in California is made up more than just environmental policies, and we'll get onto that maybe in the next conversation. You did mention education, and I want to touch on it because the thing that prompted this back and forth initially was your letter and then an accompanying article about education and proficiency in math and English. You have the article there, Michael Shure?
I do, yes.
Why don't you explain the general situation and then make the case that you're making? Go ahead, Randy.
Well, the article starts off, it's fresh off the press. It's dated May 1st, 2018.
We should say, just to interrupt, it's from cnsnews.com. It's the right news right now. So it's there's a lean to that, correct?
Let me guess, they're leaning right.
Well, it's funny you say that, Michael. I never noticed it at the top of the line there, but I guess that is there. I didn't even know they were a right-wing news source. They have clipped this out of a Dredge thing or something. But what caught my eye was the educational bent on it. I suspect we could have gotten it from another place as well.
No, sure. I'm just saying that I always like to disclose that stuff, especially when
You're absolutely right. I have plenty of people I converse with that if I cite Fox News, that their initial visceral response is, it's from Fox News, I don't believe it.
Right.
And occasionally I'll have to go and substantiate it with the New York Times or another article. But, news is news. If the facts are valid, the facts are valid.
This rang true, this piece, at least the lack of proficiency standards in so many states did ring true to me. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, basically, the gist of the article is 65% of public school 8th graders are not proficient in reading, and 67% are not proficient in math. Those are abysmal numbers. That's basically 6 out of 10 people can't perform, read, and 6+ people out of 10 can't do the basic essentials of math in the 8th grade. What is so critical about that, they'll now be going into high school. and their last 4 years of opportunity to learn some of these skills that will carry them for the rest of their lives, and as citizens and as community members and as family members. And what this portends for our future is just horrible. And as a father of four, I've got a 31-year-old, a 30-year-old, 38-year-old, and a 42-year-old. I'm going to brag a little bit. Got a doctor. I got a operating room nurse. I got a high-end luxury marketing with a master's daughter in Singapore, and got a son in video production and commercial production out of L.A. And all of them are educated. None of them have any debt, because we were fortunate enough to be able to accomplish that back not more than 10, 15 years ago.
In the public schools is what you're saying.
We were fortunate enough. We had a smattering of private schools, but we also had the public schools. But bear in mind, I chose to live in Palm Desert because of their public schools.
Right, I
moved
get
from
it.
Carmel, which was so I selectively was able to make that choice and go to a great school district, because I quite honestly didn't have the wherewithal to educate 4 kids and provide for college and everything. So I made that choice, and unfortunately, I had school choice, did I? Economic school choice. I made a school choice. I didn't have vouchers, but I was able to use my tax dollars through my property tax to make that choice for a great school.
Randy, the shame of that, though, too, is that you had to move from Carmel. I didn't know if you wanted to, but in this country, people do make that move. I had a friend who left Miami for Chapel Hill, North Carolina, because of the schools. Now, he was working in Miami. He liked Miami. He would have stayed in Miami. I mean, the cost of living is higher than Chapel Hill, but it was all about the schools. So we have a country in which people migrate to places where there are quote-unquote better schools, and even that isn't definable. You know, when you hear somebody say, oh, it's not a really good school, what's not good about it? Are the class sizes too high? Well, California's class sizes are embarrassing, right? I mean, they're just embarrassing.
No, Michael, actually, that's not the choice. You're a parent, right? You have children, don't you?
I have a son, yeah, 13-year-old son.
So you certainly are making educational choices and have in the past, and you really got some major educational choices coming up.
Yeah.
The actual metric that I used, and the parents we grew up with, was not the size of the class. It was achievements of the students in their statewide testing, their national rankings, the matriculation to colleges and institutions of higher learning. Those were the only guides. I didn't care if they had 70 kids in the class or they had 4 people in the class. If the kids were moving as a group and advancing, that to me was a good school district.
That's fair, but aren't students at a disadvantage when they are in a class that size? So as to create that metric for you, there are momentum metrics too, where some schools have been able to do it over the course of a number of years, and then there's the other metric, which is that they cannot get out of the mud that they've been stuck in for so many years. And it's hard, and that's what educators, I guess, struggle with. I certainly don't have the answers for it, but you're not going to get the achieving school necessarily unless you're in one of those sort of momentum achieving schools. And I think that, again, like I understand what you're saying, Randy, and I understand how you made your decision, but I think that the success of the schools that you chose might not have happened had it not been for the fact that, or I guess would have been more difficult to happen if schools class sizes had always been so big, and it's hard to emerge from the crowd with big class sizes. And I think that class size is not obviously the only thing, but it certainly gets so many of these kids off on the wrong foot in California.
Actually, Michael, and my proposals here regarding schools have nothing to do with class sizes, have nothing to do with anything the way education is being taught in the nation. I don't want to go into anecdotal information about Carmel was a great school district, Beverly Hills High School is a great school district. There are great school districts throughout the entire country, of course. I want to talk about the national school system. It's a complete and abject failure in its present incarnation. Class sizes, money, the whole thing needs to be scrapped. And I'll give you some reasons for it if you'll allow me to.
Yeah.
Okay. The first thing is, to this day, I see no national goal in prioritizing of what we want our educational system to be now. We are going through such rapid technological change and the threats of automation and the threats to retail and the other countries that passing us in engineering and science and the rest of it. We're coming to so many issues here, and there is no national dialogue, and there is no prioritizing what we want from school and how to achieve it. If I told you Amazon's changed the entire retailing environment, you'd say, yes, absolutely. You'd say smartphones have. You'd say the information age have. You would say computer-based training is used throughout all business, industry, and government now. It's all being done that way. It's all being done on teleconferencing. Even the institutions of higher education, they're all using technology. But you know who's not using it, and you know who's not, doesn't have a policy, and what we needed as a country? Kindergarten through 12. And there's no goal. I've got some numbers here that will shock you. In 2016, there were 3 million STEM jobs available in the United States with no one to fill them. That's science, technology, education, and math. We've got an educational system that is totally out of sync with the needs of our society, our economy, our future. It doesn't work on any level. You can attack class size. It's meaningless if you're teaching them nothing that they can use.
You're arguing that the curriculum in public schools and perhaps also in some forms of private education doesn't apply to the life that we are trying to prep these kids for.
Exactly, Mark. Nor is the paradigm of bricks and mortars make sense. Now, Mark, I know you're an environmentalist, and I agree with you. I know you can't stand pollution and car traffic and the rest of it. How ridiculous is it every morning the parents get up in their cars, drive the kids to school, or the buses do, thousands and millions of kids on the road in the morning, and millions of kids in the middle of rush hours, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They come back, again, forward and back. What a waste of resources. And the resources, not just energy and cars, it's also the student's time.
And so would you would virtually connect all of these different families to a virtual classroom?
You're talking more like a virtual classroom. I'm talking satellite campuses. I'm talking much smaller satellite campuses with additional satellite recreational campuses, because the recreation is very important. But every school doesn't need, and every school doesn't need to have its own gymnasium, its own track, its own weight room, its own sports pro. When you have regional places and kids are in their satellite classrooms, and then a couple of times a week they spend 2 or 3 hours at the recreational facility getting those skills. There's a lot of other ways to do this.
I appreciate what you're saying, Randy, and because I think that America has to think outside the box. If military spending is defense, then education is offense, and you need good offense, and you also have to reprioritize the way you spend federal dollars on offense and defense.
And so when I talk about this, I've given it a lot of thought, being a father of 4, and my obligation was to give these kids the skills to be productive members of society and be able to support themselves, support their families as they chose, be contributing members of society in whatever fashion they chose to contribute. And that all is based on education.
Right, of course. Michael, you were making a point.
One point I was making, and I think that other people in the room with you, Randy, would make when you presented this, was that so much about raising children and sending them to school is about the adaptation and the socialization that happens at schools. And if we all, my son spends enough time with his head buried in electronics at 13 years old. He's not the only kid doing it. If he were, I wouldn't let him do it, but everybody is doing it. So there's a virtualness to the way they live. So much of their time out of school that in a way it's refreshing to have them at school where they are they cannot be on those electronics, and they are actually engaged both intellectually and in a tactile way with life, and that part of that we're losing right now. I'm sure it's cyclical to a degree. I don't think it will always be like this, and I don't think it will require it, but it's certainly headed in that direction. So there has to be a way to remedy that within your proposal, Randy. That's all I'm saying.
I think my proposal is not in opposition to that concept. We're talking satellite classrooms with other children involved, plus the ability to do your own online study. You're talking about satellite recreational facilities where children get together and do their separate endeavors. And also, they're absolutely, I think, we're kind of off where I wanted to go with this, because I wanted to talk about the stakeholders and how to make these changes come about, because the parents are integral to this, obviously. The children are integral to it. Our communities, our taxpayers are integral to it. And our political leaders are integral to it. Being a parent requires some parents to step up and take control of some of the problems that arise in a child's life. And you've identified it. The socialization, the 8 hours on the smartphones and the social networks and the pervasive issues. Not every parent has the skill set to say no. Not every parent understands the harmful effects of some of this computer technology and the being online and the lack of socialization. This educational process is not just about educating the children. It's about helping the parents come along. And it's about helping the immigrants here whose English is a second language. We're talking about using this computer-based technology for immersive English training, not this English as a second language the way it's practiced in our public schools. And I'll give you an anecdote on that if you'd like. But it can be not a complete panacea, but it really is the only way forward. We're using it everywhere else, including our universities. And we've got to adopt it, and we have to tame it. It behooves us to tame it, not to let it tame us. So I hear your concerns, Michael, and you're absolutely right. But that's within our purview and our control. And in designing this transition and this change to a different type of education that actually is prioritized and matched to the needs of society and our country and economy, these things are absolutely attainable. It's not even difficult. What we lack is the will, and we have an entrenched group of people here who like the status quo for many reasons, and we can go into the politics of it. You know where that's going. We can go to the teachers' unions now or later, but we got to go there sometime because they're not helping.
No, they're not. They're a union that has been, I wouldn't say detrimental, because I'm pro-union because of what it protects and what it creates. But I think that the control that the teachers union has they've been surpassed by more common sense, and they haven't delivered. They just haven't delivered. Auto unions,
exactly, Michael. Exactly.
So
so that's where I was coming from. I thought we would be less in agreement than we are here, Michael.
It's okay.
Michael's a reasonable guy, and you always think of him as this sort of echo chambery progressive, and that's Randy's big thing on us, that we sit around and we just progressive. But I think you objectively evaluate things, Michael Shure. That's one of the reasons I like you. But obviously, Michael's politics lean left.
Yeah, well, they do, and I'm unabashed about that. But they lean farther left because of how I've felt my entire conscious life, having grown up in New York City, about the man who's in the presidency now. So I almost have a much more knee-jerk reaction than I would ordinarily have because of him.
Well, you're absolutely right. The visceral response. Now, I'm Jewish, and many of my friends are. And
wait a minute, you dropped out. You're Jewish? Is that what you said?
And many of my friends are Jewish, and the visceral response, my Jewish friends particularly, have the animus they hold towards Donald Trump and what he represents is spectacular. It's breathtaking. Nothing he can say or do will ever transcend that visceral and.
Right, and I've never felt that about anybody. Anyone, and I love.
Who doesn't care for this man at all?
Yeah,
I simply look at the policies and try not to look at the messenger.
I can't do that with this person. I've done that before in the past. I love politics. I love it like sports. I love the presidency. I like presidents. I'm somebody who is fascinated by, even the dynastic parts of America that people bristle at. But there's nothing about someone who has such contempt for, the job that I do. And I sat in a pen with other reporters, far less than other reporters did, listening to his vitriol and pointing us out as the worst people in the world. On top of that, the fact that he is such a liar, and he is, I believe, someone who, if he is not in his core racist, which I think you have to believe that he is because of his policies on immigration and how he treats others, I can't countenance that, and in a way that I can't do with any other. So I'm guilty as charged, but I'm proud of my. I think as they say in hockey, I think I took a good penalty.
Michael, everything you just said is exactly my friend's exact position, and they cannot ever look any beyond the man's faults.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
and because they're so monumental for them and so non-presidential, and so for them, nothing can transcend it. Me, I'm a pragmatist. I'm more concerned about the substance rather than the form.
but there's no policy coming from there.
What's the policy that you spark to?
The first policy I support is I love Betsy DeVos, if only because she talks about school choice, she talks about vouchers, and has a transitional change from status quo. It's the only way to get from here to there where I would like to see us go. We cannot change it from within the way it is. So the current monopoly, the way business is done in education, has to be changed, and that can only be done with vouchers.
But aren't there people that have that message, Randy, as she is so singularly unqualified for a cabinet-level post?
But who else did we have?
People within education who clearly agree with her, and there are, because there are people that agree with you. There are people that Betsy DeVos surrounds herself daily with people who are in education who see her side of the story and want to push that one forward. And it was a handout to a very wealthy woman, and I don't begrudge wealth. I'm not one of those liberals who think that everybody who's rich is bad. I just think that it doesn't make them qualified, and I don't think she's qualified. So a good message and a good complaint is lost because it's coming from someone who is so unqualified to make that gripe.
And once again, that's that visceral response. And for me, I don't even go beyond her background or anything other than it's a good message I haven't heard before, and I wasn't hearing from the other side. So if the message is full of piss and vinegar, I can overlook that. If the message is
Look, you make a point about the policy message, but I think Michael makes a point about not only Betsy DeVos, but as you look at this administration, it's filled with people who are rank amateurs.
I agree with you.
And they're in charge of some very important stuff.
Ben Carson at HUD.
You guys are absolutely right.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you that what you're saying isn't true, but I can tell you that in 2016, we had a choice between two candidates. That time, now once again, I'll refer to the fact that I'm Jewish and I'm very concerned about Israel. At that time, I was absolutely certain, I am certain, that Barack Obama and John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, they're no friends of Israel. They're no friends of what they don't even see what I consider the existential threat to Israel, and always have seen it. I'm well versed in the Holocaust. I'm well versed in the history of the Jewish people.
No, that was your issue. There are a lot of singular issues. For me, it's environment.
Exactly, but when you talk about potential genocide of an entire nation and a race and an ethnicity of people, which we're talking about, Iran status, Hamas's status, non-recognition of Israel, you're talking about something that goes beyond my personal right. It's the right of these people to exist.
Sure, no, I get that. So that became
go
ahead.
These were some of the policies that I had to make a choice. So once again, only two choices, gentlemen. And to me, I called it a shit sandwich.
No, I remember you saying that. And you know what? It's still tasting shitty every day.
Yeah, right. You're right. Got it. I agree with you 100%.
Randy, we love having you on. I'm so sorry that our time is gone, but I appreciate your engagement. I appreciate your thoughtful reflections, and I appreciate your support. You've been a great supporter of the show, even though you disagree with stuff. I love that you still run with us, and I also love your input. And look, we'll do this again, all right?
I would like it, and I want to congratulate you. First of all, I know Michael's not a one-trick pony. And when I say the echo chamber, I only meant that the echo chamber was when you're talking about the same story, and you both have, shall we say, a liberal progressive slant on it. That's all I was saying. But no, you guys are both reasonable for new ideas. And I want to compliment you before I go. The interview with John Colblet, this last one, it was a wonderful, wonderful counterpoint to some issues that we think are important. And I think you appreciated John's input there. He was well-reasoned and calm and rational, and he's got a lot to say. And I think it was great that you allowed him to say it.
Thanks, man. So that was a few minutes with Randy. We have to wrap up.
First of all, I mean, Randy was great. It's great because we have thoughtful listeners, not just, people who fly off. That's kind of cool.
We have them, too. We just haven't had them on the show yet.
Right. They don't get to come on.
Michael Shure!
You guys are good.
Oh, wow.
I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. And if you haven't already, why don't you show your support and subscribe? What's the matter with you? Go to Edge Show. Oh, shit, it's Edge Dash. What's with the dash? Stupid. All right, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. Show your support and leave something on their website, edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is there a dash?
edge-show.com.
Well, I'm joined by J. Elvis Weinstein,
Hi.
the original voice of Servo from Mystery Science Theater, also documentary filmmaker. I always like to take the opportunity when Josh is here to mention his documentary, which is now available. But why should I mention it when you can mention it?
Why, thanks, Mark. It's called I Need You to Kill. It's about stand-up comedy in Asia, and it's funny, and it's a romp. And it's available on Amazon, iTunes, Google Play, elsewhere.
That seems like a good list of options for people to see it.
Yes, I recommend renting it.
We welcome John Iadarola from the TYT Network. Also, though, he has a documentary of his own, Josh.
Nice.
John, first of all, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here. Very excited to finally be on the show.
Your documentary, I've only seen a handful of episodes. But Josh, you can understand why I only have so much time, and the episodes are 16 minutes. That's a very long.
That's not Mark life friendly.
Yeah, right. No, I love the fact that they're not long because then you can move from one topic to the next. But tell everyone about it. It's called True North.
It's an incredibly bingeable documentary series. As you said, they average probably 14 to 18 minutes or something like that. So we spent a couple of months last year up in the Arctic, in particular north of Norway, in an area called Svalbard, and north of there even. So it was pretty much the far Arctic. It's you go to Norway, you go to the north coast of that, you fly 1,000 kilometers north of that, and then you take a boat 700 to 900 kilometers north of that.
Wow.
And so we were basically very close to permanent sea ice where you could not go any farther. It's as far as people take boats, actually.
How long does that trip take?
There was multiple legs, obviously, but the boat portion, there's that island of Svalbard, which is the northernmost permanent settlement on the planet. We went a week or more north of that by boat until we finally found the sea ice.
How many Svalbardis are there?
How many? It's complicated. There's probably maybe 1,500 Norwegians and about maybe a couple of hundred of Russians living there.
Okay.
But it's a very seasonal sort of thing. People don't tend to live there for many years. They come in, they do research, or they work a little bit for the students and the scientists, and then they move out.
And it's officially a part of Norway?
It's complicated. There's a treaty. That particular land is it's primarily managed by Norway, but theoretically anyone who wants to have a settlement there can. And so Russia has for many decades.
Okay.
But while there are people there are actually more polar bears on Svalbard than people at any given time.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern among your crew and yourself as to where polar bears are, the likelihood of running into polar bears. What do we do when we see a polar bear? Should we cluster together? Should we split up? There's a whole back and forth on that. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, and we actually cut out a lot of my fear about polar bears. We didn't want to put too much of it in. But it is a concern. I mean, they're the largest land carnivore on the planet.
And they're pissed off.
They're very pissed at what we've done to them.
Their climate is leaving them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see a dozen friends float off on an ice floe to the horizon. You get cranky.
I know it's not your fault, but this is still something I'm taking out on you.
They've got some questions to ask about Scott Pruitt. They don't like some of the moves he's making.
Absolutely. Including the furniture.
It was a concern. It ended up being fine. Nobody got killed.
You know, you mentioned Scott Pruitt, and we talk about environmental policy of the U.S., and, you're kind of, because we are American citizens and we live here in America, and because we live in America, we focus on Scott Pruitt. Also, he's sort of taking a torch to everything that I value. And but anyway, what I thought was interesting in your documentary was that there are references to the government there making changes or ignoring certain things such that there was damage being done to the environment. And I realized, oh, yeah. I mean, it was kind of an obvious point, but somehow it had been lost on me. There are other governments that are also ignoring stuff, even in this land that is so connected to the environment around it.
Yeah, it's being affected at an even faster rate than we are. And look, in a lot of ways, I mean, Norway's where I want the country to go on a number of different policies, but it's not perfect on everything. I mean, a lot of people have a big problem with the fact that Norway is one of the last countries that does wide-scale hunting of whales. And then also when it comes to resource extraction, I mean, they are big. They have a lot of coal development still on Svalbard, and certainly oil, offshore oil drilling. And that's one of the ways that sort of they've been propped up is they have access to all these resources. It's used by the government to sort of create this sovereign fund, but there is a lot of oil generation. And we spent a little bit of time on a Greenpeace vessel. It's just one of these conflicts inside of Norway right now where some people want to move the country to a new place, but it's still sort of wedded to the past when it comes to energy.
You see the ravages of the coal industry there. You do stop in a coal town, a town that was really defined by coal mining. Mm-hmm. You go into a coal mine in one episode, and they discuss even the corrosive aspects of the coal industry, both in terms of the health and in terms of sort of the economy and how it changed.
Yes, we did spend some time in a Norwegian coal mine, and we also visited a ghost town of what had been a Russian mining settlement. That was abandoned partly because of the changing economy, I guess. Some of the coal exploitation wasn't as profitable. But there were also a series of disasters. I mean, many coal miners lost their lives. There was also a really bad plane crash where something like 25% of the settlement died in one moment. But yeah, we got to go into the coal mine and experience a little bit of like a tiny fraction of what their life was like. And they were very upfront about what the experience of those coal miners had been and just the sheer number of deaths from the exposure to the chemicals and disease, things like that, but also collapses, explosions, a lot of heavy equipment. It was an industry that in the same way that it processed coal, it processed human lives to turn it into profit. And it wasn't necessarily concerned the entire time what happened to the people.
And is that because it was outside the realm of regulation? And is this in Svalbard or is this?
So far as I know, it's in that particular industry. I don't know that it's any less regulated than it would have been in other places. I think that both there and here, coal miners' lives, while we love to talk about them as this sort of like, hey, if we could get back to coal. But we want to get back to them dying of black lung and them dying in collapses. And look at, Blankenship is going to be running, for the Senate. Like we honestly don't necessarily care so much about their actual lives. We love the image of the coal miner, the idea that this is American industry. But around the world, they've been abused pretty much everywhere.
Well, and the truth here in America is that you can't revive the coal industry, really. As the one stat that like MSNBC likes to throw out is there's more people that work for Arby's than the coal industry right now.
And nor should you want to renew it,
no,
even
of course
if you
not.
could.
It's a filthy way to power anything.
It's but it's interesting. It's like a throwback, that one episode where you go into a coal mine and also, as you say, where you see this town that was dependent on this industry that really was no longer relevant or should no longer be relevant.
Can I say one more thing about that? There was one moment of, at least for me, symbolism that I found to be a little bit optimistic, that we went into this coal mine and we went pretty deep down into it, and they showed us something that's down there. And what is down there is the precursor to the current seed bank in Svalbard. They now have the big seed bank that you see in the photos and had the accident last year. But it used to be inside of the coal mine where, they were pulling all this coal out, helping to cause climate change. But they were also, I guess, storing the seeds there in case things go the way we think that they might.
Right.
And
so I kind of like that symbolism, that it was inside of the thing that was causing its need.
There's a lot of irony in this series. In fact, one of the stops along the way, and I'm so sorry I haven't seen every episode. I really can't recommend this show enough. I really enjoyed it, and it was literally just a time thing. I wasn't able to watch more. But anyway, in episode 3, the small town editor of this paper took your co-host through town, talked about the sustainability and the issues regarding getting rid of waste there, because it's just a much bigger problem. There's permafrost, which there's not like landfill per se.
No, I mean, pretty much everything that is produced waste-wise has to then be shipped back to the mainland.
Yeah.
Think about how inefficient that is.
So there's a car wash there. Now, you can imagine cars are incredibly dirty because of
coal dust and the like.
So this car wash opens, and 2 months later, they have to close because, and this is the ironic part, the cars are too dirty for them to dispose of the waste that rolls off of the cars.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I can attest to the fact that the vehicles there are filthy.
I mean, it's wild. But you go to these places where life is so different. you know. The original mission was that you were going to explore climate change in this far-off place. And so some of these stops that I've mentioned along the way were sort of on the way to that, but they also take stock of the climate changing there.
Yeah. So the overarching mission was to sort of take a look at this region and see how it's changing over time. But we also knew that we want to bring people in, so we have some adventure, you know, the dog sledding and things like that. And there's a good amount of history there and a little bit of culture. In the food episode that you're watching, at the end of that, we actually go to the only fine dining restaurant on Svalbard, which takes this traditional Norwegian and Arctic food and then makes it extremely fancy, and they get you drunk while you eat it. So it's fun.
I have to cut you off here to be a total buzzkill. We are not big fans of the dog sledding, and it was hard for me to watch that episode.
Yeah.
The Iditarod, as you know, every year dogs die in the Iditarod. But there is a wondrous aspect, obviously, to the relationship between people and animals, and there is a relationship there as well. But boy, I didn't want to neglect mentioning that.
No, that I totally acknowledge that. I know there are documentaries that have come out recently about it. I can only speak to the one place that I went to, but people that I saw there, I never saw any mistreatment. They seem to have, like the man's wife, it's a small operation, basically a couple. I mean, she loves these animals. They keep them in family groupings. They're outside. They eat well. And all of the dogs that I worked with were desperate to pull the sled.
Sure.
Like, they could not help themselves in how much they wanted to be engaged in this. Now, that doesn't mean that they theoretically don't get abused elsewhere. It's certainly in the races. I mean, these are extremely rigorous things. But
that's the thing, is the difference. I mean, is there no place for the quote unquote working dog?
Two things to say. One is, first of all, when these dogs are past the point at which they can pull the sled,
right?
It's not like there is some field where they all live. Oftentimes they're euthanized, much as a greyhound might be after its racing days are over. But more to your point,
I'm saying, is there an abuse-free way to do dog sleds?
Of course. I mean, if there'd be some people who would say no, but I would say, yeah, the dogs are enjoying that environment. But there was a moment in your show even, and I really don't want to get off on this, and maybe I'll just cut all this shit out. No, but when you were asking, do the dogs poop? And they say, yeah, we don't stop, but they do poop. Mm-hmm. That will give you a sense of something, which is that we're driving the sled and we don't stop for something that you should stop for. I mean, the animals should be allowed to relieve themselves without having to run at the same time.
But don't you think that they've adapted to that thing the way that horses do?
Horses do it because they do it, but I don't know that they want to be. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that they want to be.
Hey,
moving.
if I could shit and keep walking, I know.
What's stopping you now?
Well,
give it a few years.
Just a skill set, really. I guess.
Look, I'm not some expert on animals and pooping and whether they can do it in motion, but I think dogs would prefer not to be running when they're pooping.
Well.
Yeah, I can't. I think the concerns are totally valid. I know I love dogs more than I love literally anything else in the world, and the dogs that I witnessed there seem to love their existence. I had a very tiny window.
Yeah.
So I can't say, and especially for any other group that trains them, especially if, I mean, this was a group that he does race, but he largely takes tourists out and things like that. It's sort of a tourism thing in that area. It might
so you
be
want the
different in other
dogs,
places.
you want the dogs well treated, and you want a happy pack because they are going to be interacting with the public. And look, I found the episode charming. Your exuberance and that little bit of adventure was fun. So please don't misunderstand me.
No
I just wanted to take stock of the fact that certainly Iditarod.
He's playing to the base,
and I totally understand that.
But anyway, yeah. So there is some adventure, but you're on your. I mean, like there isn't already an insane adventure going on.
Yeah,
you're going so far. It's really a remarkable mission. Are you an adventurer? Are you like a snowshoer or a backcountry traveler or any of that?
I hike a little bit, I guess. I'm not as adventurous as my girlfriend in that respect. I'm not particularly well traveled, honestly. Like, I studied abroad in Egypt. I have traveled in some places, but this was very much a fish out of water thing for me. The reason that I wanted to go was we would be with this international team of climate scientists, and that was, while it doesn't make up the bulk of the show necessarily, that was the bulk of my time there. And just being able to show that, so for us to go there, it seems adventurous and extreme, but that is their life. And I think a lot of people think of climate scientists and they think, oh, they're in a lab somewhere. Oh, they've got some satellite that they're getting information from. Well, that's true, but some of them are out on the extreme edges of human habitation, risking their lives to shed light on what's going on. And so the ability to show people what that work actually looks like, what some of their experiments are, how they gather this data, I found that to be a great opportunity.
How many of those climate scientists are there, roughly, there? I mean,
on that particular boat?
On that boat, yeah. I mean, 10?
Somewhere between 10 and 20 and crew. So yeah, somewhere maybe around 12, probably.
So did it
from all different countries?
Was it close quarters or was it?
It was relatively close quarters. The boat that we ended on was industrial, I would say. It wasn't made to coddle humans. Back decades ago, it was actually a sealing vessel that was repurposed to turn it into a research vessel. So we probably would agree it's a better use of it. But it was very industrial. There wasn't a lot of amenities necessarily. The crew seemed to love their experience. Some of them had been serving on that ship for decades at this point.
And these are scientists working for.
So many of them were part of the Norwegian Polar Institute, but others are just scientists who sign on based on some sort of professional affiliation with the group. But there were French scientists and Germans and people from the UK, Americans. They were from all over.
That's kind of cool, huh?
It was, and to see how they interact with each other, it was a great group because I instantly had to deal with extreme seasickness like I'd never experienced before. I don't have a lot of experience on boats, but the sort of people that are continuing to do this work are the ones who are they're hardcore people. Some of them had actually participated.
So were they hazing you when you were?
They didn't haze me, but you could see that they enjoyed the experience I was going through. But some of them had actually, a few years ago, they took the ship up even further and they allowed it to get locked into the permanent sea ice. It was called the In-Ice Mission. And so for 6 months, they couldn't leave. It was just permanently surrounded by ice. They made encampments around the boat on the ice, conducted research for the whole winter, and then got back on the boat as the ice broke apart and sailed away.
What was the name of the British explorer who got locked in and died with his team? Or
died with his team?
It was I'm trying.
I mean, there were some like Nansen and things like that. We covered a little bit of their work on the trip.
Was that the North Pole thing?
I think so.
No,
I ruined our flow with that whole thing.
Shackleton.
Shackleton. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Ernest Shackleton?
Yes, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. I just
Good
happened
memory.
to know that.
That's amazing that you pulled that out from the midair like that.
Only had to think for a second or two.
Really good.
But for me, it's that these people, they're the true adventurers, and they're doing it just so that we understand a little bit more about the currents, a little bit more about the flow of heat throughout the planet. And the reason that I care about that is there are people who want you to believe that they're engaged in some sort of self-serving hoax to fool us into thinking climate changes. These people they're humble to a fault, really. They should not be as humble as they are. They refuse to make big, bombastic statements about the climate, and they're just so hardworking in just trying to shed a little bit of light on what's going on.
See, I don't think that they're doing anything sort of bombastic, sort of hoax thing. I think that they're running from life.
They might be. You are cut off from the world. I mean, when we were on that boat, the only connection we had to the outside world was text-based email that you had access to for about an hour a day when the satellite passed over.
Okay.
But other than that, you were away, which in the time of Trump was actually a nice little holiday.
I bet it was. I remember getting away like the week after I was shooting in Canada, the week after 9/11, and it was just so nice. It felt like going to summer camp almost. Just
A nice reprieve, yeah.
Can you give us an idea of the scientist who's out there on the ice? Are they doing core research? Is that what they're primarily doing?
It depends. I mean, there were very different sorts of scientists. In our particular mission, there wasn't anyone focused exclusively on ice, at least on that mission. Some of them do that work and had previously done it. Most of the people there were very focused on the oceans. And so one thing that we did was they're deploying these still somewhat experimental underwater semi-autonomous gliders that travel under the ice and do these deep dives where they can collect data about the water at many different layers from the surface down below. And they're extremely expensive, these devices, and they can be destroyed by almost anything. And so there's a little bit of drama in the show as to whether we'll be able to recover it at all because it went off the grid for days. So some people were operating that glider. Some were deploying what are called moorings. I don't know if you're familiar with. They're hundreds of meters of cable that are weighed down by these anchors, and the entire length of it is just scientific data gathering devices. And so what you can do with that is you can put those down in the ocean, you leave them for a couple of years, and then you come back and you try to find them, which is difficult because it's like a needle in a haystack. But then you get the data back, and you have extremely sophisticated granular data about all different sections of the ocean over the course of literally years. And the reason that's important is in the same way that we talk about things like the jet stream and how that shapes climate, there are these underwater currents that are extremely important for producing regional climates as well. It's one of the reasons Svalbard isn't as cold as sections of Canada that are in a similar position on the Earth. And as the climate's changing, those currents are also changing. And so we need to understand that to get an idea of what's going to happen.
Wow.
So a lot of it was water-based.
And then there's one guy who just stands outside and licks his finger and holds it up.
He's
like
on
for
to something.
hours a day. He just goes out there.
We didn't talk to that guy that much. He was a weirdo.
Steve.
So how much is the climate changing, and how bad is it? Was the consensus, to the extent that you talk to these guys who are involved in cutting-edge research, that we can stop it, or not, maybe not stop it, but in some sense slow it down? Or so how bad is it? How bad is it going to get? And is there any optimism?
Well, they definitely, while they professionally don't necessarily talk much about what they think is going to happen, I mean, privately, they're all horrified. I mean, they're just horrified at what's going to happen. And in particular in the Arctic, I mean, there were a couple of ways that it was clear what was happening to us. Many of the people we talked to, especially in the north coast of Norway, talked about growing up where they were and how we were surrounded by these mountains. It's extremely mountainous, fjordy territory. And they were like, my entire life, it was beautiful snow-capped hills and mountains. And it's not. It's just not anymore. It's different than it was just a couple of decades ago. There are glaciers that all of the maps that we had were effectively out of date because the glaciers have been retreating so fast that you can go to places that literally were impassable before. Even the main port on Svalbard, the tiny little docks they have for that town, there were months and months of each year that you wouldn't be able to travel to because of permanent sea ice. But now effectively year-round you can get there. And even just to find the permanent floating sea ice, we had to travel and travel and travel because the past few years have had record lows of sheer quantity of sea ice. So we had to go way farther than we expected we would to even find it, which is horrifying. You expect you're going to go to the Arctic, you're going to see snow and you're going to see ice.
Right.
But we had to work our asses off to find either. And we eventually
And
did.
try not to get palm trees in the shot. It's
Exactly,
really
yeah.
so annoying.
Cut out the Taco
You can
Bell.
shoot the pickups at stage 53.
But
So
yeah,
is there
I
like a go-to satellite imaging service that keeps people abreast of what it's really like then?
In terms of the sea ice?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a real-time satellite mapping of sea ice, and if you look now, actually, the winter after, so we were there before the Arctic winter. This past winter has been even worse, and there were periods where the Arctic, on average, and on average for a region this size is a little bit of a ridiculous concept, but it was something like 37 degrees warmer than it's supposed to be.
Wow.
Which is insane. I mean, that's because the thing is, we talk about climate change, we talk about avoiding 2 degrees Celsius of global average temperature change, but it's far more extreme at the poles. I mean, there we're talking about 8, 9, 10 degrees possible change, which is the difference between having ice and not having ice. And so obviously, that leads to things like global sea rise. But the reason I talk about the currents too is some of these underwater conveyor belts of water, like water moving around regions and around the world, they themselves, when they're disrupted by climate change, can lead to even more sea rise. Divorced from ice melting, divorced from the expansion of water from heat, all of these things individually will increase the level of the sea. And I think that we're focused on sort of like what happens if Antarctica melts or Greenland melts, but that's only one thing that's going to lead to the sea level rising.
Yeah, it's really, when you put it that way, it's so...
Even just the amount of plastic that the size of France makes it rise a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a whole other thing. I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of plastic that's being discharged in the ocean. We just had this conversation with a guy who was here last week because I went around and around with him about plastic straws, and he just refused to. There's a phenomenon, and this does apply to what we're talking about in Western culture particularly, which is associated with we don't want to change our lifestyle.
Yeah.
Nothing. We just don't want to change anything. There's a sense of being entitled to it. There's a real sense of entitlement.
I've always done it, therefore it's harmless.
Yeah.
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 Well, and the thing is, like, one of the scientists on the boat had been, I mean, the research was still in the beginning phases, but he had worked out what he thought was a way for people to drink without straws. And I think that if we continue down that line of research, we can figure out how to put a glass to our lips. No, but really, like, yeah, the level of plastic pollution, both plastic pollution and microplastic pollution, is absolutely ridiculous. And it's something that I think most people don't even know is a problem.
Listen, and again, I hate to veer into this political realm, but it seems as though no matter what you're talking about, you're edging into it. On the plastic straw thing, it's sort of, well, here comes the nanny state telling me that I can't be. Yeah, we're the nannies taking care of you. We're the nannies trying to make sure you get to the next year of life.
Right.
I mean, it really does I mean, the evidence is so overwhelming. And when you put it in the stark terms you have, and when you see it in the stark way that it's shown in your series, wow. But it almost doesn't matter. Just to make it feel really good, your series will have no impact at all on the entitled Western culture that we live in.
I'm just hoping to bring in especially some young people with a little bit of adventure, and then hopefully they'll pick up some of the climate scientists and want to do something about it. It's a long running battle trying to get people to accept both that we should do something and also that we can do something. And so hopefully my next project will be a little bit more focused on some of the solutions.
The world of the young progressive, because you're in this world of TYT, which is a progressive news outlet, and you get a pipeline into the younger voter in general. But I mean, there's a pretty good demographic on TYT. It's pretty broad, but there's definitely a vibrant young demographic.
And Mark.
I used to say, they bring the young, I bring the Turks. I'm curious about that crew. I'm curious about, those voters. For example, this question comes out of something I just read, which is how the younger progressives are divorcing themselves from the Democratic Party. It's too corporate for them.
Yeah. And so that's why one of the biggest goals that I have personally is attempting to do whatever is necessary to reform the Democratic Party, because I think that at least the way that elections are run right now, they are a necessary thing, a necessary but flawed.
There's no winnable third party yet.
I completely agree. Yeah.
And look, I am completely in favor of changing over our system of running elections to something like ranked choice or approval voting or something like that. But so long as we don't have that, I mean, the Democratic Party is more easily reformed than the Republicans, and I think that it can happen. I think that we've seen a number of Democratic senators pledge to not take corporate PAC money, which is a small step, but it's a necessary one.
I love that you said that, because I feel like that's something that's come from this movement. I think the drumbeat got loud enough, people go, okay, I'm not going to take any corporate money either.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it's very issue specific. Like, you can see the movement coming out of the Parkland students and see that any Democratic politician that's taking NRA money is probably going to be in trouble in the near future, which is great. But the NRA isn't the only organization that perverts the legislative and democratic process. Like, we need to understand that all of these corporations having this outsized influence is probably bad for the country, and that there's other ways of running elections. There's other ways of funding campaigns. Like Beto O'Rourke in Texas is doing it, based much more on small donations. Bernie Sanders showed.
Richard Painter just entered in Minnesota. Left the Republican Party, is running as a Democrat.
Interesting.
With no corporate or PAC.
You can do it. You can do it. And it's not a net loss of money. I think that if you show that you are authentic and if you show that you are going to respond to the will of the voters, that money will be made more than up for by donations from regular people in manageable quantities. I think that that's much healthier.
The real election reform should be what? That there be no contributions, that there be an allocation, and then the allocation is equal to anyone who reaches a certain threshold of signatures, let's say. Is that the kind of thing that you would embrace?
Yeah, and look, I'm not an expert. I don't know exactly how you would set up those thresholds, but certainly there are countries that do it. And there's other elections inside of the U.S. that are run in that sort of way. I think that taking the aspect of money out of it and focusing it more on the ideas and the experience and the values is good in any number of different ways.
I also think that if you up the stakes of participation somehow by national holiday for election days,
yes.
Or I think if the participation level becomes a majority sort of proposition, and people vote as a matter of course, I think they'll start caring more about what they're voting for and start being more selective about candidates, I think.
I agree. I agree also with the supposition, which is voting days should not be on a day where people have work and other responsibilities. I understand other responsibilities they may have in their life, but there shouldn't be any professional responsibilities associated with voting day. You should be able to vote and not be penalized in any way for doing it.
I don't understand how that is not the case already.
They vote on weekends in other countries,
Yeah, and we have any number of federal holidays. Right. We can't have a democracy day. We can't have a voting day. We can't have America Day. Yeah. I think any politician who runs on that, first of all, you're going to get the people who want reform, and then you're just going to get the regular people that want a day off. They might go vote just for that.
Right.
Yeah, our system is really messed up. It also goes on a long time, which squeezes more dollars out of.
You're talking about the elections go on for a long time?
Elections
Yeah, they
go
do.
on for a long time.
Way longer than other countries.
Obviously, voting day doesn't go on too long a time. No, the campaign season is way too long.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, and I think that beyond just their positions on the issues and some of the shifting values of younger progressives, I think the lack of interest in continuing the BS back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans, where we have this very narrow range of ideas, a very narrow range of possible outcomes. I think that younger voters are not interested in that, and to the extent that they can blow that wide open, they will do that. If the established parties are able to fight off those sorts of reforms, then I think you're going to have more apathy, which would be terrible, and I hope that it doesn't go in that direction.
Yeah, me too, because I think it's very hard to change this institutional system. It's a very tough spot because, in addition to the corporate interests that have flooded the political system with money, you have other interests that benefit and get healthy in that system. For example, mainstream media. A lot of these local stations wouldn't exist without these political seasons feeding them political money for ads. I mean, literally, they're living political season to political season.
Yeah.
There isn't
That's
enough.
their Black Friday.
Right. There's not enough ad revenue to sustain this old media anymore. Mm-hmm. And so you see how it's this dance that everybody's doing. The consultants, they get fat on it. And so the consultants...
Right, because they take a percentage of the ad buy.
And that's why the ad buy is old media. I mean, it's really... and so there's so many vested interests in this old system that is not working to get out any real information or to even get you the benefit of the best candidate.
Yeah, totally. And one way that I hope we can get around that is, in particular, I think that you need a strong leader. And I think that if you can play to the self-interest of whoever wants to be the next Democratic presidential nominee and convince them that the way to do that is not by taking the corporate money and not by playing by those old rules, but instead, some of them, I can already tell they want to be the next Bernie Sanders, at least in some sense. Right. If Bernie Sanders himself doesn't run, that will definitely undercut them. But and the way to do that is by denying these sources of funding for your campaign. And if you do that, then you will get the votes. And at the end of the day, the money is just a road to the votes. If you can just get the votes directly, then you don't need it. And hopefully that will be enough to divorce them from the corrosive influence of money in politics.
I think there's a generation coming into voting age now and slightly older that has sincerity detectors that previous generations didn't necessarily have, I think. And
I hope.
And I mean, I get that sense.
Yeah, I think that I think authenticity really cuts through these days. And you're right. For example, Bernie Sanders felt authentic.
Right.
Hillary Clinton was canned. I mean, in addition to all the other issues that Hillary Clinton had, being from the moneyed aristocracy.
There wasn't any passion seeping through with Hillary Clinton.
But you can tell manufactured passion. For example, Ted Cruz is manufactured passion.
Right.
You hear him shouting, you hear him in a pulpit kind of way.
But it's a completely intellectual exercise for him.
Right, and he's just going through the motions. Right. Yeah, I think that you make a really good point. What worries me are the institutional barriers to getting real positive leadership in America, and by that we've already touched on the moneyed system, but gerrymandering is the other problem.
Yeah, right.
It's so severe.
Well, and it's starting to fall in the courts, luckily, at least.
That's true.
Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be very interesting when the Supreme Court, if and when they do actually finally really say something, aside from commenting on, when like Pennsylvania or North Carolina will get up to them. I want them to actually weigh in, but I'm a little bit worried now with the balance of the court, how exactly they come out on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, those sorts of, money in politics, gerrymandering, things like that, these are foundational issues that allow us or don't allow us to have change on the more high-level policies. And so I think it's good that people are focusing more on them. I don't think it's something people generally thought about all that much 10 or 20 years ago, but now we're being forced to.
How did you get involved with TYT?
Well, I actually, when I was in college, I listened to TYT back when it was on Air America Radio, way back in the day, back in like 2005, 2006. And at that point, I was a political science student. I had no intention of ever being involved in any kind of media.
And where was that?
This is at the University of Connecticut.
Uh-huh.
Top-tier school. So, and I ended up going to UT Austin to do a PhD in government that became political psychology. And I had just been listening to them for like 5 years, 6 years maybe. And they wanted people to send in videos from universities to talk about what's going on at their campus. And so I was so desperate to hear Cenk and Anna say my name and play my video, that I took time out of my PhD program to make videos and send them in. And that became all I did, basically. Week after week was sending in videos, and they kept playing them. And eventually it turned into, I asked for an internship, and then they offered a job.
Wow, that's
And
terrific.
even when I was hired, I wasn't hired to do on-camera stuff. I was hired to help out Anna with research or whatever. But it ended up working out.
It really did. I remember when you were. By the way, you went to UT.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell this story real quick. It's a digression. Sorry, but sometimes digressions are a good thing.
It's your show, Mark.
I was going to school back east at Colgate, and not that that's important. But I don't know. I always fill in a bunch of details. I'm realizing that I'm really not good at telling stories, Josh. And I fill in a bunch of details that have no relationship to actually moving the story forward or like tell
But
a
this
story.
is helping.
Yeah. I really.
This
you know
is
what?
making Colgate look good, actually.
Fuck the story. Forget it. No.
what's the story?
So we drive to the West Coast for an internship at UCLA. The drive through Texas takes us to UT, University of Texas, Austin, right? And it's so cool. Like, you know, I'd never driven across the country, and I'm in this car that I saved every dollar to buy, and we pull up, and we're staying at my fraternity house because that was the kind of cooperative agreement you have between fraternity houses, and you can stay there as long as you know the secret handshake or whatever the crap is. So we go there, and two things happen. A, we get into a card game in the basement with everybody else, and these guys who just are there for the night, we win all the money. It was so embarrassing. And so what we immediately did is went out and bought beer for the entire place. Like, we spent every dollar we won, so we didn't walk out of there with any money from them.
Good call.
But the other thing they did was, prior to the card game, they took us on a tour of the University of Texas. Just a card, like driving around town. Beautiful town, of course. But it was like a cartoon because they did that thing where in Texas, everything's in terms of size and how big it is. And it was like getting to a point where it was hard to stifle laughter at, like, Mark, you see that? That's a Tridale house down in front of that Tridale house. You see the rose bed there? Yeah, that's the largest rose bed on any sorority house in America, Mark. In America. And that's cool. And you said that's a state house down there, Mark. You see the state house down there? Yeah. Now, that's the largest state house in this country, Mark.
By a square meter.
He said, not in terms of square footage, but if you measure from the steeple all the way on down, that's the largest one. There's nothing bigger. It was, and so when you say UT, I can't help but think of that tour. It's a beautiful place, by the way. Austin was really pretty.
My favorite Austin memory is I played the Paramount Theater with Cinematic Titanic, and they put us in a hotel downtown, and I was on a high floor and on a balcony, like watching Austin at bar time. It was like the evacuation of Saigon. It was just this amazing sight of just everyone just packing it up and wobbling off, with cars sort of DUIing their way back home. And
Those crowds are the largest in the country, by the way.
It was the biggest drunken crowd in America that night.
The drinking age there, I think, was 18 when we were there, but now I'm sure it's 21.
As far as I know.
Everywhere.
Yeah. Right. So I want to go back to TYT for a second. So you're there, kind of just this guy, but you have some chops with video because they've seen your stuff. You're as a kind of a contributor. So did you then what was that first day where somebody said, hey, let's put John on. He should be on the panel.
Well, I can't imagine it's from those first videos because, man, they're terrible. I've watched some of them recently, and it was embarrassing.
How long were they?
A few minutes.
Yeah, okay.
3 to 5 minutes or something like that. But I think it was a convenient time to join because Anna Kasparian was hosting the college-focused show, and I think she just wanted to focus on other things, and so she brought me on to be her co-host almost instantly, based off of no merit whatsoever except the fact that I was there. And I had done videos for them previously. She needed help, and so I benefited from that. Look, the reason I wanted to work at TYT is because I enjoyed listening to it. I enjoyed just political conversations. And so I was the insufferable guy in class in college who'd raise my hand and talk about politics. And so when I was working on the production meetings for the main show, we would just be, like shooting the shit about politics. And I guess from that, Cenk felt confident that I had the grounding in it, that he brought me on randomly to be a guest on the main show once. And that turned into, within a few months, I was hosting once a week on the show, and that became 2 times a week, and I became his fill-in. But it was just a very natural thing where Cenk and I started talking about politics, and he eventually just wanted to have cameras on while we were doing it.
It's really cool to see. I used to come on and give John a hard time, and because I would say, when I met him, he was a fresh-faced kid, just happy to get on, and now here he is hosting.
No, I still am.
And it's true. It is cool to see that art, and you're really such a great, thoughtful, reflective, political mind. So
thank you. I consider myself extremely lucky, by the way. There are a million different ways that the entire thing could have fallen apart.
Yeah.
But thank you.
So what is
now he's playing to the bass.
What is happening at TYT? You guys have grown enormously. I mean, there is also another cool thing, which is this guerrilla kind of broadcast TYT. These rebels, really. I mean, that's what the Young Turks is. It refers to rebels, and there was a rebellious aspect to it, and is a rebellious aspect to it still. But I'm just talking about in the early days. It was just a small group of rebels. Now it's a large group.
Yeah, it's a lot bigger. Yeah,
it's rebels with money now.
Well, and
not much, at least not coming to me. But
yeah, no one's getting rich working over there. But there is funding that's come in now to try to improve, upgrade, and I think more importantly, expand and maybe upgrade that way with an investigative unit now and more TYT branded shows. I know you're not a spokesman for the network, but is that more or less a summary of what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like we have enough employees now that I routinely don't know people's names, which is a big change from when I was hired on. There were like 5 people who were technically TYT employees. I mean, we have our reporters in DC and in New York. We have the investigative team, new contractors joining that. I mean, a lot of that I honestly don't have that much information about because I have to be so focused on what I'm doing. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. But it is good to see it expanding. Like, I want to see more diverse voices. And in terms of how we consider ourselves to be rebels, I mean, there are a couple of ongoing things that I think set us apart. I mean, Cenk had set up Wolfpack, the pack to get money out of politics. He started less than a year, or maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, the show that I think you're hosting today actually is at Rebel Headquarters. But anyway, we've been doing ongoing coverage of as many primary elections as possible. I mean, and that's so rare to see in the media focus on the primaries. Generally, we just let what's going to happen, and usually that's the parties choosing their own candidates. And then we start focusing in the run-up to November. But by then, much of the hard work has already been done. And especially in a year where we expect some sort of wave, in a lot of places, the Democrat is going to win. So it's even more important that the right Democrat is in that spot. And so we're doing live election night coverage of even single special elections, the primaries. We've been doing that week after week and trying to get as many of the candidates on as possible to get people to volunteer for them and donate if they approve of their platform. And so in that, at least in terms of our topics and our focus, it's very different than watching, MSNBC at night.
No, there's no spotlight on MSNBC or any of the mainstream media on any of the candidates that have been featured on Rebel Headquarters. Josh, what's interesting to me is that we talk about the ways that TYT is expanding and all the new programming, and this is how unmedia this guy is, John Iadarola. He did not mention he's got a new show. It's a new daily show, and he didn't even mention. I mean, how many times?
That's going to hurt you in the long run, but yeah, I like it.
I mentioned TYT, I mentioned the thing, I mentioned that they're expanding, then I mentioned it again, then I kind of recapitulated, and I go, is that about right? I'm thinking like giving him all these chances. Nothing. He doesn't plug it.
Oh, I don't know if I'm supposed to yet.
Oh, is that right?
But yeah, no.
Well, I saw something. What are you talking about? It's on YouTube. I saw a damage report on YouTube.
Yeah, so I have been uploading some videos. It's this weird soft rollout where we haven't formally announced it, but also generally, one of the reasons I will never succeed in this industry is that I am so un-LA. The idea of like bragging about what you've done, I find kind of reprehensible.
No, it's not bragging. You're desperate to get people to watch all of
promoting.
us.
That's promoting.
It's promoting.
Part of
you
your
have
duty.
to promote it.
Yes, so I don't know how much and how formally I can promote this, but I will say that if you go to youtube.com/John Iadarola, if you can figure out how to spell that, there is new content coming out every day, a preview of what is going to be launching in the near future. Actually, TYT has several shows that are going to be coming out in the very near future, not just myself, but some of the best personalities from TYT are going to have their own shows soon, which is incredibly exciting. Very different sorts of shows, too. I mean, mine is going to be focused very much on bringing in experts, academics, scientists, politicians, all of that. Reporters and journalists. I can't say too much about the others, unfortunately, but it is very nice to see TYT expanding in this way, continuing the core mission, but also diversifying in how we do it.
And around TYT, is MSNBC the competition, or is Vice the competition? Like, what's the pond that they're trying to be the big fish of?
I mean, we definitely see ourselves as an alternative to things like Fox and CNN and MSNBC.
Okay.
I mean, we're very different in a lot of different ways, but as a resource that people can turn to each day to get an idea of what's really going on, I think that that's probably the most direct comparison. I mean, there's places like Vice that do a great job of doing their documentary series and Fusion and things like that, but we see ourselves as a place that you can turn to know what's going on. And so in that way, probably the larger cable news stations, although we're very different, obviously.
But it is a news organization.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. With some original reporting and investigation as well, a lot of curation and explainers and things like that at the same time.
It used to just exist on the net and used to exist on YouTube. It still exists those places, but there are other places where TYT is showing up now. On Sirius, for example, I've heard the main show on Sirius Satellite, and I don't know where else, but I think it's now being repurposed in other places as well. So there's an expanding landscape of places that TYT is showing up.
Yeah.
Where, as it used to be, sort of YouTube and, of course, the TYT site exclusively.
Yeah, and it's great to be back on Sirius too, because that was one of the first places that anyone ever heard TYT way back was on Sirius. And look, along the way, we've had a couple of TV tie-ins, like we had TYT on Current TV back when Current TV was a thing. I hosted a show on Fusion, TYT on Fusion, and there's some things that are going to be happening in the next couple of months. We're going to be showing up in new areas.
I remember when I filled in for Jank hosting on TYT on Current TV. And I was coming from mainstream media where neutrality and perfect neutrality is rewarded. And I show up there and I'm really bringing that to that. Like I'm super neutral on everything. And that just was because that's where I was coming from. Now I think of myself like at TYT. It's the one place I can just let it rip. I don't have to, it's so great. I feel so comfortable there. Everywhere else, I have to have neutrality. Yeah. I think about those days on Current. You mentioned Current. That's made me think of it. Those days on Current seem like a different guy to me now as I look back on it. I was so neutral, and I felt like that was my role was. But in truth, the world of TYT is filled with authentic opinion that you just let fly. And I really don't feel as though you get that in many places, certainly not in a progressive way.
Yeah, the closest thing that you get on a lot of the mainstream cable news shows is dueling talking points, which can reflect a goal of a party, but don't necessarily reflect real values of regular people. But when I think about you feeling constrained and not being able to express yourself, like you're clearly, like even just in the context of the podcast we've been recording, you are a values-focused person. You have these core values that you want to see reflected in your politics. Like imagine keeping that from the audience. It would be, why have you at all? It just seems so odd to me why someone would want to restrain that.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to mention really fast, we uploaded a video recently that they put together where it was as many of the personalities as possible their first time appearing on TYT. And I saw yours, actually. It was back in like 2005 or 2006. It was so long ago, way before I'd been on there. And I had not known how long you've been involved with the network, actually.
Yeah, I came over to fill in for Ben, I think, originally. And then when Jank wasn't there, they had me come over and fill in for Jank. It was just the two of them, Ben and Jank. And there was also, I forget her name now.
Was it Jill Pike?
Jill Pike, thank you.
Yeah.
And it was Jill. It was cool. I loved it. It was fun. I really, and there's something about, I love radio. I mean, it was radio on YouTube. They just had the cameras locked down.
Yeah.
But I love that quality. There was as I say, almost a guerrilla quality, like it was guerrilla TV, guerrilla broadcasting.
Yeah.
And it was even in a business district building that mostly was vacant and some of it was being reconstructed. It felt like it sort of had that bombed out building
Bohemian
quality.
News.
Yeah. Park at the McDonald's and sneak around so they don't see that you're not going to the McDonald's. It was that kind of scene,
I remember that McDonald's, yeah.
So it was really a lot of fun, but it has been so exciting to see it grow, and to still be a part of it is really rewarding. So, all right, so True North is the series. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that I spent the better part of 2 days looking for it on YouTube, and you won't find it on YouTube. I think there's one episode of it on YouTube, the first one.
We've uploaded a little bit to the channel, but mainly it was produced in conjunction with Verizon. They wanted it for their Go 90 platform, which is a streaming platform that I hadn't been familiar with, but I should have been, because there's a ton of great content on there, both original but also a lot of older content as well. It's a 100% free app. You can get it on Android or iOS. It's also available on your browser and pretty much all the set-top boxes. But again, it's Go 90. It's 100% free, and you can see the entire show on there.
Is that, but only if you're a Verizon subscriber?
No.
Okay.
Anybody can go, and you can be signed up in just a minute and have access to that. There's movies, there's TV shows, tons of original content, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and it's laid out like YouTube, which I actually like. I like the layout of YouTube, where you're watching episode, you can see that there are other episodes queued, ready to go if you want to. You can also, it's seamless. I signed in with my Facebook app,
Yeah. What I like about the show is each one is sort of a topical focus, and as we've said, they're very short. I've been obviously flapping my yap for quite a while on the podcast right now, but I don't host the entire show, actually. About half of it is hosted by Shivala Madlina. She's my co-host, and she's a British investigative journalist and documentary filmmaker who is unbelievable. One of the coolest people I've ever met. She has worked everywhere in the planet. She's been in North Korea, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, everywhere that you can imagine. She's been around working for the BBC and Reuters and just has this amazing life experience. And she's a great addition to the show. And so even if you've been turned off by me, there's always her.
I didn't even know her background, but I thought she's great on the show. So,
oh, she's incredible.
Knowing that makes it even cooler.
Now she's credible, too.
Now I loaded that Go 90 onto my phone, and it's there, and it's cool, and I enjoy watching it. So I recommend the series.
Thank you.
It's called True North, and you can also see John Iadarola on TYT. Damage Report is coming.
Yep.
It's a morning show.
Yes.
Minus all the laughter and the inane talk and the weather person. You don't have.
We don't. But if we did, we would go for
no,
an established personality.
I'm done with that. Josh, what do you have coming up? Anything?
I have nothing.
I mean, later this afternoon. Do you have anything this afternoon?
I'm going to go home and work on my other podcast, Thought Spiral.
There you go.
With Andy Kindler and
See,
myself.
I had to drag him to that plug as well. John, thanks for being here.
Yeah, anytime. Thank
really
you.
Had
a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
First of all, it's great to be on the show with all of you and all that and all these things. I love it. And if you enjoy listening to The Edge, subscribe to The Edge on iTunes, the Stitcher, and you can totally listen to it on iHeartRadio.
Hi, it's Robin Super here. Listen to past episodes and subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher to get future episodes or edge-show.com.